Wendy, thank you so much for having me here and having everyone here. Thank you. Thanks everyone for coming and attending. I don't do these that often, and it's a pleasure when I get to, especially with guests like Christina Ross and Sandi Lin and Janice Chen. Three female founders. Actually, I should stop using the word female founders because I believe they're just founders. And you know, I have a certain philosophy about these things, and you know, Sandi and I often talk about this when I tell her that I truly approach the world being blind to color, gender, race, etc., and life circumstances, because I've myself wanted to be treated that way, but I also recognize that that you know, that's not how the world works always, and so it is all of our responsibilities to promote and work hard at you know, creating equality at every single level, and do what we can do. So I take that responsibility very seriously, and you know, it's a I hope it's a lifetime of work that I can continue to dedicate myself to. And so I've had the pleasure to work with Sandi and Christina and other you know, CEOs in the portfolio who are not men, not of traditional backgrounds. As a matter of fact, I've also worked for two venture capitalists I've been trained by who are not men. I've worked for a number of venture capitalists who are males, but I've also had the pleasure of working for Virginia Turzen, who was a great mentor, and Heidi Roizen as well. She's one of the key people who was responsible for having me come out to Silicon Valley and had me put on this path of pursuing venture capital. So I'd like to thank everyone for being here and giving me this this platform to have a fun conversation with Sandi, Christina, and Janice. So maybe I'll just kick off with just quick introductions. So I'm one of the partners at Mayfield. I help lead the enterprise software practice, and I focus and specialize on application software, SaaS. And that's what I've been doing, supporting entrepreneurs in that area for 14 years here at Mayfield, and did venture capital at a couple other places before this, and then have been in the enterprise software industry for a while, both as an entrepreneur and as an executive. So just with that, I'd like to just introduce really quickly the panel. We have Christina Ross, the co-founder and CEO of Cube Software. And you know, Christina, maybe you can just give a, maybe I'll just do a quick roundtable, and then you guys can talk a little bit about more about yourselves and introduce yourselves. So we have Christina Ross, the co-founder CEO of Cube Software based out of New York. Sandi Lin, the co-founder and CEO of Skilljar based out of Seattle. And we have Janice Chen, the co-founder and CTO of Mammoth Biosciences. And Janice, you are in San Francisco or Berkeley, or where are you based these days?
San Francisco these days. The company is in Brisbane, which is just north of South San Francisco.
Right. Great. So why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself and a bit about why you're here and what do you hope to share with the audience today?
Sure. So thank you so much, Rajeev, for the introduction, and thank you to AllRaise for giving me the opportunity to be on this panel with these amazing founders. It's truly a privilege to be able to talk about, you know, our journeys. And so, you know, my name is Janice Chen. I'm the co-founder and CTO of Mammoth, and I actually consider myself a scientist founder. So coming in from the life sciences biotech industry. A little bit about my background. I did my PhD in Jennifer Doudna's lab at UC Berkeley, and you may know her from her recent Nobel Prize on the discovery of CRISPR as a gene editing tool. So I know, you know, part of our goal here is to tell you a little bit about our stories and how we got to where we were, to hopefully inspire others who are considering this path. But for me, you know, I never really considered starting a company as the top of the list. Part of considering my career options was really just talking to people, attending panels like these, and just learning about what PhDs did sort of in the next step of the career, both in academia and industry. And I think a lot of what motivated me was having someone like Jennifer be a really strong mentor and really pushing me to think big. And for me, the breakthrough moment was sort of near the end of my PhD when we discovered that CRISPR could not just edit DNA, but also detect DNA. And then being able to show that the technology could detect cancer-causing HPV in patient samples was really what unlocked me and my co-founders to realize, okay, we have something really powerful here to be able to transform it into a company. So sort of after that moment, it was sort of an obsession for all of us to think about how can we actually build these CRISPR technologies to address unmet needs in healthcare, and really building the technologies beyond just the academic lab to help people. So, you know, coming out of grad school, there really wasn't much to lose, and we just decided to take the leap of faith. So myself, co-founder Lucas, Jennifer, and Trevor decided to just come together and start the company together. So Mammoth, you know, we are developing this Nobel Prize winning CRISPR technology as a programmable search engine for the genome. And today we are discovering and developing these novel CRISPR proteins to diagnose and cure diseases. And in the future, our platform will enable industries beyond healthcare, such as agriculture, biosecurity, research, and more. So with that, I'll hand it over to Rajeev to introduce the next speaker.
Janice, thank you so much. That's really inspiring, and I'm sure we'll learn more about how you guys are as a team sort of have taken the journey forward to truly building a groundbreaking platform company. Sandi, why don't we go next with you?
Sure. I'm Sandi Lin, the CEO and co-founder of Skilljar. We build customer education software for companies to deliver product training, and specifically, we're best at end users, customers, and partners, or people outside the four walls. Typically, if you're HR and employee system. I am an engineer by training, civil engineering actually, with a focus on transportation and supply chain and large scale systems. Worked for that for a few years after undergrad, then went to business school. I did not identify as somebody that would ever go to business school, so happy to share that experience as well. And then after finishing my MBA, I joined Amazon as a product manager in 2009. So I have some pretty large company experience as well. I kind of always wanted to be an entrepreneur. My dad was an entrepreneur. I always had that like little voice inside of me that said, can you do it? Can you do it? But honestly, I was terrified about the career risk, the financial risk, the throwing myself off the cliff to all these things I wouldn't know and be responsible for. And it actually has been terrifying. So I'm happy to talk about that as well. Skilljar now, we're about 170 people. We've raised over 50 million in venture capital, 400 plus customers. So it's been quite a journey. We've pivoted a few times early on, but our mission is to create the win-win-win, the win where anyone can get the skills they need to succeed in a changing economy, where customers can get the full value of the products and services they're trying to use, and where companies can also drive business outcomes through learning.
That's great, Sandi. Thank you for that. And you are changing the world in many, many ways by enabling people to really be equipped in this new digital economy. I call it the new digital economy, but because it's, today software is only still 2%, tech still only sort of 2%, 2-3% of the GDP, and equipping the next generation next generation workforce with the ability to use the products and services to do their job better is a pretty incredible thing to do. And while doing that, you're also enabling incredible business success. And it is pretty remarkable, all the wonderful things you've been able to do in the last few years. And I think you've only gotten started. So Christina, you're up next. You have a wonderful story as well. And both of you, Christina and Sandi, share something in common, that you both were tech stars sort of entrepreneurs. And I know there was some questions around advice on sort of, getting into, accelerators, incubators, et cetera. And so maybe you guys can share that too as when you talk about this. So Christina, with that, please.
So my name is Christina Ross. I'm co-founder and CEO of a company called Cube. We're a real-time FP&A platform for modern finance teams and businesses to make faster, smarter decisions. And I'll start by saying that I know not everyone thinks of finance as the type of company or a finance-centric company as being mission-driven, but we very much are. And our mission is to elevate the role of finance in an organization. And when you think around the corporate table, who often has the seat that's thought of as the back office, and that's typically the finance persona. It's ready for rebranding. It is still thought of in many ways, if you know the movie Office Space, as stapler in the basement, the CF no, don't spend any money. But the reality is the future of finance is incredibly strategic. And it's the difference between companies that do not well or fail and the companies that really excel, and moving finance from being a cost function to being a growth function. My background is I'm a former CFO. I am very much have been a startup groupie in many ways for most of my career. After being at big companies like GE and a consultant with Deloitte, I found this little company no one had heard of called Rent the Runway. There were maybe 30 people at the time, and I joined as their first head of finance. And I repeated that journey a couple times through different startups. And one thing I learned in that journey was how important the finance role is to survival in companies in stages like these, and how misunderstood they were. And one of the reasons why they were misunderstood is they weren't empowered to do the work that they were there to do, because they spent all their time manually aggregating data in all these different spreadsheets. So I'm sure some of you are dealing with that now or have seen it. And what we built at Cube is a financial planning and analysis platform to not only take away all the manual pain, but empower these finance users to make faster, smarter decisions and be heroes within their own organizations. So I'm super excited to join the panel today because I felt like when I was first fundraising, there was this unwritten playbook that I didn't have access to. And if someone had opened up that playbook for me, it would have saved a lot of challenges, and there's so much growth and so much journey ahead still, but hopefully we can share some of those pages with you all today.
That's great, Christina. And I think it's important to underscore, again, I often talk about this. Sometimes it's hard to get inspired by boring software. What software, what can it possibly do? But your company, again, is if companies can make better decisions about where to allocate their resources, both financial, human, and other resources, they can drive better outcomes, right? Innovate better, create products and services that actually truly make an impact and change the world. So that's the connection between that and actually really bringing things to life. And of course, Janice, your company is at the forefront of transforming so many things, and it speaks to very closely to me and some of the causes I'm involved with, given I have a special needs child, and a lot of the research that is being done around finding a cure for his condition and the condition of many children like him has benefited from CRISPR technology to create, for example, mice models and other things, and may even have efficacy in the eventual therapies that they might come across. So I think there's a few questions that came from people, and then there are some questions I think we have discussed together as a group, and in our conversations we talk about these things in terms of some of the opportunities and challenges you face as entrepreneurs in raising capital, hiring people, building companies, creating winning cultures. Maybe we start with a topic around fundraising. I think that's probably a pretty key and important one. All of you have sort of touched upon it. Maybe we start with, I have two questions I really want to dig into. One is, fundraising, how, there's a few questions here. I'll just rattle them off, and then let's sort of make a more of a dialogue around this. How do we fundraise when we don't have product market fit? If the MVP is primitive, is there a chance to get funding? Do VCs invest at the early stages, pre-seed, seed, et cetera? And so, you know, and if you're in beta and pre-traction, what are the most important data points to share when applying for grants and accelerators? You know, is it market size, potential, revenue? Are there tools and services you recommend that can help guide a new founder estimate that stuff? So the point is, it feels like there's questions around what stage do I need to be in order to engage in a fundraising process, and what are some places to start, right? Do I go to VCs? Do I go to angels? Do I go to, you know, friends and family? Do I go to incubators? Who wants to start on this one? Why don't we start with Sandi? Why don't we start with you?
All right, cut me off if I'm going too long because I have opinions. So I think first of all, kind of less demographically advantaged founders, this is actually a more important issue because often we don't have the same access to generational wealth or, you know, high net worth individuals. You know, my parents were immigrants that came to this country with nothing. So, you know, you know, you can self-fund yourself financially or hire a team that can self-fund themselves financially often becomes a more acute issue, I think, for less represented founders, more than others. And then also I can say for me personally, like I very much upfront decided I was not willing to go into credit card debt or sleep on people's couches or, you know, all the sort of war stories you hear about fundraising. And that was a decision I made for myself early on. So I think one of the secret playbooks or pages that Christina mentioned is that all of the dialogue around for early stage fundraising, you know, prototypes and traction, a lot of that is just a way for the investor and the entrepreneur to get to know each other, because there are angels through VCs that will fund on a PowerPoint, and there are angels and VCs that will not fund through a PowerPoint, and the same fund or person or partner will say one thing and do another, like in any given situation. So it's all situational. And so a lot of the dialogue around these very, you know, fundamental business questions is more around kind of get to know you as a person, get to understand how you think about the space, right? So for me, you know, and you know, I started this company in 2013, so the environment was very, very different. And I was also terrified by the fundraising process and asking for money. So the idea of applying to an accelerator made a lot more sense for me because I kind of understood that process, right? I've applied to schools, I've applied to jobs, like I kind of knew how to get through that. And then it was a very like, you know, it doesn't hurt to apply. And if you get in, then you get, you know, that gets you along, you know, another milestone to the journey. So I think the accelerators were, you know, much more prominent in the early stage fundraising ecosystem, you know, back in 2013 than they are now. But, you know, I'm very glad that I did so in hindsight, because I think it helped, you know, there's a big difference between having zero money and having, I think, $100,000 or what it was at the time, because it's a huge difference in terms of just being able to, you know, pay your AWS bill out of something that's not your own pocket. So.
And that was Techstar Seattle, correct?
Correct. Yeah.
Great. And Janice, how about you? How did the fundraising process start for you, or how did you even think about it? You know.
Yeah. So, you know, first of all, for us, at least, fundraising has been a team effort. You know, I'm not the CEO, so I didn't lead the fundraising effort. Our CEO, Trevor Martin, is the one that led that effort, but it really was a team effort between the founders and sort of the core employees at Mammoth. And certainly in the early stage, like Sandi said, I mean, everything's so vulnerable, right? It's kind of a chicken or the egg problem, I think, is what a lot of the questions I think we're getting at, right? You don't have the capital, so how do you get to showing your prototype works? But you also need to show a prototype works to get the capital, right? So there is kind of this dilemma, certainly in the early stages. I think I can speak really only to my experience in the biotech industry, and then this is my first startup and really my first real-time job. So I come from a unique, I guess, background where I came to this with completely fresh eyes, which has been great, but also has been really challenging. For our industry, biotech is extremely capital intensive. It's really hard to bootstrap. You need lab space, you need to, a lot of what's great about coming from academia is that you do, at least in my case, we were able to do a lot of that proof of concept as part of, our research as PhD students. So a lot of the early prototypes, if you will, were done, as an academic graduate student, and we're able to, out-license that technology or in-license that technology to Mammoth from UC Berkeley. We had, again, a lot of great networks, being in the Bay Area, being in Jennifer's lab, connecting with Trevor, ultimately connecting with Mayfield, and getting a lot of momentum around, okay, getting alignment on what is the mission of the company, how can we continue to build this platform, and kind of leveraging, again, the resources as well, particularly with incubators. I think for biotech companies, it's really critical to get the lab space and show initial proof points early on, and ultimately kind of lay out a plan that you can execute on. I think the other piece for fundraising is, for us, it was really important to make sure that we were in a position of strength when we were to go out fundraising, just to make sure that we could really leverage kind of the value creation that we had been developing at the company. But certainly, yeah, in the early days, it's hard, and there's a lot of uncertainty, but it is just being super thoughtful about who you're talking to and making sure that the investors that you're interested in are really aligned with you, the founder, and the company and the mission.
It's great. And Christina?
All right, I have a few thoughts, so let me just cover some of them. First is, I'll start with a warning, which is you'll get a lot of, why don't you just advice, which is what I got during the finance journey of like, oh, my buddy so-and-so, he had a deck and he raised like $15 million before he had anything. Just, it's okay if that doesn't happen to you, because you'll hear the stories of the one-offs. You'll hear the stories of the 1% of deals that make it worth talking about. So fundraising is hard, despite the fact that you'll hear lots of stories about how easy it was for some people. It's hard. Two, my fundraising strategy was to play Moneyball, because the beginning is the absolute hardest, in my opinion. And then it gets a little easier and a little easier and a little easier. And if you know Moneyball, the idea is to get on base. And so each step of the way, as you're making progress in your journey, in your startup, it's to get on base. It's to get the next win. And getting my first dollar of funding was moving a boulder up a mountain. So I really resonated with Sandi's point of zero money and 100,000 is such a big difference. And at later stages of fundraising, 100,000 is nothing. At early stages of fundraising, $20,000 would have made all the difference in the world. So just make that incremental progress to get on base, because that'll allow you to go further and further. I think the other really important thing is your fundraising that it took me a while to figure out is it's all about fit. So now that I'm a lot more involved in things like sales and marketing, everything I relate to a funnel or a funnel exercise of what comes in at the top of the funnel and at the bottom. And when you're fundraising, you're thinking about your investor funnel. They're looking for you just as much as you're looking for them. So one thing that changed my mindset on things was actually being in a dinner where it was mostly investors and a couple of founders, and the way they were talking about founders, how do we get in these good deals? And I was like, wait a minute, they're all fighting over us. I thought we were fighting over them. So get your mindset in, they're looking for you. You're not just looking for them. And then when you think of that funnel, it's all about the right fit. Someone rubs you the wrong way, you don't have to work with them. If someone doesn't understand your space, then that's their loss. I spent so much time trying to get people to understand what our company was and how it worked. They weren't going to be the believers because they didn't understand it. And so what I should have done is moved along earlier rather than trying to get them to see my side. So remember, it's ultimately a fit exercise. I'm sure there's lots of other nuggets, but those are a few things for me.
I was going to add also, there is a deal out there for you, especially now with AngelList and all kinds of ways, virtual. You don't no longer have to, just pitch local people in their area. So I completely agree with Christina. I think for my first round, I pitched over 100 potential funders. And I actually set myself a quota where even before I was fundraising, I said, every week I'm going to meet with one new person that could be an investor in my company. And I held myself to it because it was very uncomfortable for me. So there is a deal out there for you, and it's legwork.
That's great. It's some great advice. I think one of the things that I sort of heard here, a couple key things I heard here. You can, there's some questions around what stage should I be fundraising? At what point should I go out and start fundraising? And I think fundraising in a way is a state of mind, because you need capital, some sort of capital to develop your product, your service, and get it out there. And so there's an old adage that says entrepreneurs or founders should always be fundraising. And I don't mean that in the sense of, you have your business to run, your product to build, but there's this concept of you do need capital. So you always have to kind of be attuned to the fact that you are open to capital or capital conversations, especially in the early days, because let's face it, it's hard, right? So you kind of have to have almost this subconscious background process running in your mind that this is something you have to do, because it is not one of these things that you're going to do all this stuff and then you're going to go fundraise sort of in a serial fashion, right? Yes, at some point that's what it becomes, but I think it is a bit of a state of mind, because in the early days, it's the people who believe in you. They believe, they really, really have to believe in you, and they have to believe in what you are trying to do. And they have to be comfortable with the fact that whatever it is that you're going to do will also change and evolve and morph. And so it's a little bit of both of those things, and it is a bit of a sort of this somewhat amorphous exercise, but it's a state of being, state of mind. And like Christina said, hey, you're at a dinner, there's like 8-9 people. If you have that, and they're investors, if you have that sort of background process running in your mind, you're like, wait a second, these are potential investors. Now, one of them might be interested in what I'm doing, or none of them might be, but they like what I'm doing or who I am and what I represent. They might say, listen, it's not for me, but I know somebody else who's really looking for something like this. So I think that's an important part. And the other thing I would say that I've observed is, I think people out there, there are a lot of people out there who want to support entrepreneurs, especially in today's day and age. I think A, they want to do that. B, people have a lot of money. If people haven't noticed that the Fed's been printing money at a prodigious pace. And so there is that opportunity. One just has to also believe it's possible, right? I think, yes, it's hard, and the statistics are not very encouraging always, but I think first of all, one has to believe that it's possible, and that's an important component. One question I have for all of you, and for Christina and Sandi, and for Janice, you too. At what point, and this is connected to fundraising, right? In a way, at what point did you sort of, was there a specific point in time at which you said, I'm going to go start this, I'm going to be an entrepreneur? Like there's a shift that happens in your mind. And was there a shift that caused you to say, this has to happen, I'm going to succeed at this, and you crossed a threshold? Because I think that's an important part to making a commitment to becoming an entrepreneur. and then sort of raising capital then becomes part of it, right? It's this moment that you cross this threshold. I'd love to hear that from the group here. And how did that create? Did that help in that? Did that conviction help in sort of saying, I have to find capital now, and now I'm going to go execute on some strategy?
I can answer that. I knew I always wanted to be an entrepreneur because I became this entrepreneur groupie where I was doing startups, but I wasn't the one in charge. So something was always inside. The way I made it happen, though, that was the hardest part. So the mind shift for me was, how do I now move my life around this thing that I really want to do? How do I take what's in here and make it part of my environment? That for me and my story was, I had a full-time job as a CFO. I was making good money. I had 2.5-year-old twins at home. I was in my mid-30s. This isn't really the time you start a company and take no income in. But for me, if I didn't do that at that moment in my life, there's no way I would have done it 10 years later. That's the story that I told myself to make the change. And I had a conversation with my husband. There's actually a very specific story where we were going to buy a house. And we said, well, if we buy this house, we have to get a car, maybe 2, and we have to maybe have a live-in, someone to watch the kids during the day. Anyway, I'll make a long story short. We realized we would be tied down financially and I would never be able to do this. And so we made a decision that in order to be the entrepreneur that I felt up here, I was going to have to change my life. And so like Sandi said, I didn't want to sleep on someone else's couch, but for us, that meant some other sacrifices. And I gave myself a time limit of a year of, if I'm not making the right amount of progress in a year, I'll revisit this. And then it was off to the races. So I spent like a good 6 months of time before I quit my job, really, really understanding what it meant to be an entrepreneur, reading every single book, not about like how awesome certain people are, but literally how hard it is. Because if you prepare yourself for how hard it is, I don't want to say it's not hard, but it doesn't surprise you. So I'll use the example again that I had twins and everyone told me like, it's the hardest thing that ever happens to you, having 2 babies the same age. And when I did it, it wasn't that bad because I was prepared for it to be the worst thing that ever happened in my entire life. And of course it was wonderful, but same thing with being an entrepreneur. Everyone's like, it is the hardest job in the entire universe. But once you get yourself there mentally and get your environment there, then there's no stopping you.
And Christina, and how did your first check come about? There's a lot of conversation. I'm seeing a lot of comments on, what was the lead look like, your first check that gave you that confidence and that allowed you to, and did things accelerate after that? And how many people did you raise capital from in your sort of early phase? And was that before Techstars, after Techstars? And you were at Techstars New York, right? And so when did that first capital show up, and where did Techstars fit in? And maybe we talk about a little bit of how your seed happened, how your Series A happened, so people get a little bit of a full picture here.
Yeah, I had a lot of why don't you just advice in the beginning, and everyone's like, the market's so frothy, everyone's so wealthy, just have 10 people write you a $50,000 check, you're all done. I'm like, okay, who are these people who are going to be writing me a $50,000 check? I didn't have the network of wealthy people. I knew a couple. I have like a rich cousin and I got a check from that, but this was a friends and family round, and you can only pull together so much in a friends and family. But I wasn't getting $250,000, $500,000 that I would need to really hire people who are going to commit to building this product with me. So I actually started cold calling or cold emailing. I looked out on LinkedIn for people who were associated with my somewhat niche industry and pitched them, literally just live pitched them. And I got some initial interest, but I also didn't know how to close at the time, how to close an investor. And so I had a lot of people sort of waiting for the round to come together before they'd commit their checks. And it really took one final yes. So by the time I got the yes from Techstars, if you're in the program, every other check, I didn't even have to get into tech. It was just the getting in part. It's before Techstars started, that once people heard this one signal from the market, my round literally closed immediately. So I went from maybe having 150K to 600K in like 2 days covered. And then once I had that, I was oversubscribed for my round. before I knew it, I was picking which investors I wanted or not in my pre-seed. And we ended up like having to cut it off at 1.25. So it was a waiting for the signaling. I see in the comments here what is good at closing looks like. So I saw this in some of the other questions before. I was new to asking for money. And the first problem with what I just said is I'm asking for money. I'm not asking anyone for money. I have a really amazing business that if you're lucky, you have the opportunity to invest in. And that's a mind shift change. So number one, I had to get out of the I'm asking you for money for my business. And instead it's, I have a really cool opportunity. I might have some space, maybe I can let you in. And one piece of coaching that Techstars gave us was it's language you're using. It's maybe I can squeeze you into the round. How much do you have? We have a certain amount to allocate. So again, you're thinking of it like a constrained resource. This is part of it. And then when it comes to closing, people might have some objections. So it's like closing a sale too. You might ask them, they were like, oh, I really, this is interesting. I could be interested in investing. And then I used to leave it there and be cool, I'll call you later. Instead, now I ask them, well, what would it take for you to get to say 25, 50K? And they might say, well, I really want to see another small fund in the round. Okay, so assuming there's another small fund in the round, you're in. So get their specific objections. And then when you get that fund in, you call them and you come back. So that's the soft close. And then when you want them to write the check, say, I need it in 24 hours, give them a time limit and the round is closing. So you get them from whatever objective they have to saying, assuming that objective is met, we have a deal basically, and then get them to the other side because everyone wants to sort of commit, but never go all the way. And then finally, the seed and Series A are longer stories, and I want to give more time to Sandi and Janice to cover.
Christina, that's wonderful, and I can testify to Christina's approach because she worked this magic of the fundraising, the painting an amazing vision for the company that she was building, her background, why she was committed to it, and the product they were building, that we at Mayfield preempted the Series A. We preempted the Series A by probably, I don't know, 12 to 18 months. Your plan was to raise your Series A 12 to 18 months after the seed round. Is that fair? Something like that. And so she did do this Jedi mind trick on us as well, and we're glad that it worked out. Sorry for the Star Wars reference, but Christina's starting to do sports references, and Christina is not a sports person, so I'm really excited to see that. And I think one thing that Christina you're describing here, and Sandi you've described this as well, is that fundraising is a sales. It's a sales process. It is a sales skill, and I believe that every person in the world is, in a way, a salesperson. You have to embrace selling a little bit. And especially as an entrepreneur, you're always selling, right? You have to attract capital, you have to attract customers, you have to attract employees. And oftentimes, I find entrepreneurs, especially product entrepreneurs, and I apologize if I sound a little judgy here, but there's a little bit of aversion to, I'm not a salesperson, I'm a purist, I'm creating a product and this is going to change the world. But we're all deep down salespeople, and selling is done right is a good thing, because selling is about solving somebody else's problem, and it's a very empathetic act, because it implies that you listen, you pay attention, and that person is trying to solve a problem, and you have a solution for them. And in the case of Christina, the way Christina has described this, is they want to invest in you. They want to invest in an innovative company. They want to invest in entrepreneurships and entrepreneurs. And yes, they want to make a return, but this is really risky stuff. So they are seeking a company and a founder to invest in. And so if you tap into that, I think, and sort of think about it from that standpoint, I think it is about understanding their needs and seeing whether what you have to offer them fits that. And so sales as a thinking about it as sales and developing your inner salesperson, I think is something that I would encourage people to really think about and embrace. And if that's it's a place where you need help, you know, get some skills around that, or you know, even role playing and working with your friends, etc. It's okay to do that.
Rajeev, I would add also especially if we're talking about angels, a lot of time their goal isn't necessarily to make money from an investment. It's around what they can say to their friends that they did lately, who else is in the round, I co-invested with so-and-so. And so this is where they kind of herding to the close. And especially early stage investors are a little bit driven by fear of missing out and what else is going on. And so I actually just, like, to me, a lead, like our quote unquote lead was not the biggest check at all, but it was somebody I knew had a lot of cachet with the other, you know, in my case, Seattle investors. And so, you know, getting a lead, like nobody has to know how much somebody else is putting in, like that, yes, is going to come out in the closing docs eventually, but your lead can be somebody with putting $5,000, $10,000 in, but you say so-and-so is leading the round. Like if they have the right brand reputation, that will get other people to move too, especially when they want to co-invest with so-and-so, right? And then I'm not familiar enough with the actual transaction vehicles anymore, but I think there's like SAFE and other types of rolling convertible things where, I mean, part of Techstars coaching is also set your first goal really low. And so you're always 50% full. So your first, you know, like your first, like we're raising 200,000, it's our friends and family, you know, like even I was able to cobble down, you know, I think 100K of commitments from my own savings. And like Christina, I'd also given myself a year. I had saved to make this possible. You know, I had every moderately non-poor person I knew was asked to participate, of which, you know, you'll be able to hustle up, let's like, you know, with enough effort, some degree of funding, and then you're 50% closed. And then all of a sudden the next day you're oversubscribed. So you're expanding the round, and that's a bit of the psychology.
Yeah, that's great. And look, there's a balance. You know, look, fundraising is difficult, especially in the early days, but, you know, with difficult things also comes appreciation for the resources that you acquire, and then how you think about spending them. I do wish that fundraising were a bit easier for entrepreneurs, especially for you know, entrepreneurs of diverse backgrounds and women. You know, it needs to be easier, but there is something to be said about fundraising. The barriers to fundraising actually do create an appreciation for the capital you have and how you're going to go spend it. And because overcapitalization does create a lot of problems as well. And so I do believe that, you know, when founders do have a tougher time raising capital, they build different types of companies. I'm not suggesting that we should have, you know, fundraising should be made difficult, but you know, I always think about several silver linings. Anything that's hard usually produces, right? Like diamonds are created by putting a lot of pressure on things. Let's shift a little bit from early stage fundraising to a little bit about sort of, you know, the company building side of things. You know, you have capital now. You know, I guess one last thing on capital would be is, you know, in the beginning, all capital is the same. It's green. You know, dollars are green, and you just need the money. How do you think about the quality of the investors that you bring on board, whether they helped create a domino effect, or people who were helpful and provided you advice, and how has that sort of affected your thinking as you build your company? Because you need capital, but then, you know, you need things beyond capital. How do you think about investors and quality of investors as a component of fundraising and building your business?
I think I might have gotten some advice from Rajeev once that, you know, do no harm is a good place to expect from your investors, like in the full range of things, right? Because for the most part, your choice of an investor, as long as they do no harm, is not going to make or break your business. And if you're expecting them to transform, your vision or whatever, you're probably expecting too much. And many investors can actually be destructive in terms of taking your time, resource, kind of meddling with what should be management decisions. So I think the first bar is like, do no harm. And then incrementally, I mean, it's also true that there's very few, and what I appreciate about Rajeev and Mayfield is that they can go the distance from early stage through IPO, but also realistically, many investors have a sweet spot of, maybe they're helpful in the early stage, but, they're not going to be so helpful in scaling the business later. So at least for me, like finding people that I could really kind of trust at the core value level. And I don't think it's, for me at least, both my Series A and Series B leads had tried to invest multiple times several years prior to actually allowing them to do so. And so by the time that the timing was right, I at least knew they were in it for the right reasons, that they were true believers in both me and the company. And I think for me, that felt really important. And here's where, at least with institutionals, both the partner and the firm do matter, because there's also cases, and happen already to Skilljar, where sometimes a partner moves on for whatever reasons, and so what is the firm's reputation in those circumstances too, of standing by the company and standing by the entrepreneur.
Yeah, we met Sandi when there were 8 people in the company, and I tried to preempt an investment in the company, I think twice. And so, and then she finally relented and said, okay, fine, let's do this. So thank you for that, Sandi.
Well, see, I had such a low view of investors. I didn't trust any of them. Very bruised from pitching, hundreds, and especially being in Seattle, which is not an early stage capital rich environment. I think the good advice is always run a process. And so for me, preempting was hard because I really believed I had to run a process. And then for a Series A, I said, I'm going to have undeniable traction, so I will never have to go through this pain and suffering again. So that being said, I think when I spoke to Christina, I was like, take Rajeev's money because you can actually trust him. So,
let's talk a little bit about, once you have capital, how do you really think about deploying that capital? Like, what are the things that are important to you? How do you sort of think about, what's next? So you have capital. So what do you do? I mean, like, what are some of the biggest challenges that you face in sort of, starting to build your company?
Yeah, I think that's the most exciting part now that you have the runway, right? You have to think really critically about how you're going to deploy the resources. I think probably first and foremost, it's really focusing on the product and the opportunity. It's about building evidence for the vision, making sure you can really execute on the value proposition that you've defined for the company. I think that it's really, it takes a lot of discipline, I think, as well, to define sort of what the roadmap looks like for the company. I think really being clear on what your value inflection points are. Again, I think it's really critical to be in a position of strength when you are going to go into that next fundraising round, because as Rajeev pointed out, and Sandi and Christina, I mean, not all money is the same. It's really important that you have the leverage to talk to quality investors who will be able to, you have the ability to select your investors. I think that's not necessarily the case for everyone, but if you are in a position of strength, you absolutely have the ability to say no to people that you don't feel like are aligned with your vision, and you don't have to take the first check that comes through. So I think being really disciplined on how you're using the money, bringing in the best people, I think that's probably number one for us. When we started out, we had the money, we said, look, who would be the best person in the world to help us execute? And that was kind of where we focused, because you can't deliver on your mission if you don't have the right people in your company.
Yeah, +1 on team, because the day you close your round is now the day you're raising your next round in a sense. And to scale, you need people, especially super early, and it is a war for talent out there, and you need to give that person, the 18 to 24 months to scale the business, for them to assemble their team and scale. So, and I think there's a question in the chat earlier about Techstars. Techstars specifically looks for team, right? Because you've got to be able to convince those first, well, for Techstars, at least one other co-founder to go in with you, at least at the time they didn't take solo founders. And then in anything capital raise, and curious for Rajeev's perspective, but on the investor's mind is how are they going to attract the team to take them to the next level, as priority one. Now, I imagine Janice's business and some like e-commerce businesses, you do have to like pay for stuff, right? Like pay for lab space or pay for raw materials. But at least in software, my business and Christina's business, a lot of it is about hiring people to build things or sell things. And so being able to get that core group together quickly, and your selection of those people is incredibly important.
This is one of my favorite topics in the entire world, which is how to spend money and where to put it. It's part of our mission. So I'm so glad I get to at least partially answer this question. But you have to think of capital or money as your fuel. And you either want to put more fuel into your business or pull back depending on how the business is performing. So one common mistake I see at the very, very early stages, like when people get their first pre-seed capital, is actually not spending it fast enough because they want to make it last long enough. You just need to know that when you put that fuel in, what do you expect to get out? And are you seeing those results to determine whether or not to double down? For example, you put money into your business, you hire a salesperson or another engineer, and suddenly you're producing 10x more. Then put as much money as you can as quickly as possible to get to that end state to raise more money. So you sort of have to start with where is your next stage, which might be your next fundraise, or it might be a certain set of deliverables or milestones, and budget your capital to get you there. But feel free to spend what you need to take you there, but also know when is the right time to pull back if you're not seeing the results, to save it to give you enough time to meet those end results.
That's great. And in all of this, ultimately, right, like I know we're talking a lot about fundraising, ultimately all of you are trying to build great products and services, stand up great customers, with the hope that eventually you don't have to raise any more capital, and that your businesses are getting financed through customers, that's the like everybody said, once you have the capital, kind of really thinking about what are the key priorities of the business becomes incredibly important. And from my perspective, right, like financial capital, when you raise capital, it's about turning it into human capital, and that's the number one determinant. And I think we have incredible opportunity now with remote, distributed. It also presents a lot of critical challenges. It is a really competitive market, so thinking really about your key hires and being able to move pretty quickly and making decisions pretty rapidly about things that are working and things that are not working. I do believe, for most entrepreneurs, they probably spend too little time thinking about hiring. And unfortunately, hiring is a full-time job, and you're a full-time CEO, so you kind of have two jobs. But that's I think a pretty important piece. I think we just have a couple more minutes left. Maybe we do a rapid fire type situation here. One piece of advice for everybody in the audience today. Maybe Janice, why don't you go first?
Sure. There's so much advice, really good advice I've received since starting. And I think the one that's kind of resonated with me most is just make sure that you're really building your guiding principles and values for yourself and for your company, and keep asking the why. I think, for me, and I'm sure for everyone else on this panel, the journey is really turbulent and unpredictable. And so you're gonna experience a huge bandwidth of emotions, right? And I think if you can understand your why, understand the purpose of what you're doing, what the company's doing, it'll keep you grounded and it'll keep giving you the power to move forward. So that would be my advice.
Well said. Christina?
Venture capital, if you're assuming you're taking venture capital as a 10x, 100x business, you're going big. So get into the mindset that whatever you're doing when you're pitching is big, big, big. You're big, your idea is big, what you're trying to do is big, and get your head around that, as opposed to like, well, we could grow 2-3x and have an exit. No, we're thinking big. So just get your mind around that. And that was also game changing for me.
Sandi?
I would say, in a different kind of track, take care of yourself. Like, it's your company, and your ability to sell investors, candidates, will only reflect your own sort of mental and physical well-being. And I know it feels hard, but you are not your company. It feels like your company. It feels like your identity. It feels like every rejection is rejection of you. And so, to keep perspective, you know, take walks, try to eat healthfully, get enough sleep. These things are really important for you to be on your A game, because if you're not in your A game, it's hard for your company to be on its A game too.
That's great. Thank you for that. I think that's pretty spot on and amazing advice from all three of you. And thank you for letting me be part of your dreams and you know, living vicariously through all of you. And I really appreciate all the entrepreneurs here for trying to change the world and really make an incredible impact. And I'm just I'm, you know, for me, I'm always just, I wake up just not even believing that I get to do this for a living every day, to work for each and every one of you. So thank you so much.
Amazing. Thank you.
Thank you, Rajeev and Alrays.
Yes, thank you all so very much. We really loved hearing your stories, Rajeev. Thank you so much for your thoughtful discussion lead today. We really appreciate it. I put a link in the chat. Everyone, would love for you to take our event survey. If I could indulge a request, an ask as we wrap up today. But thanks from everyone at Alrays. Thanks for coming. Great to see your faces today. Have a wonderful rest of the afternoon, and we'll see you next time. Have a good one.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.